Have you ever packed your husband's bags, believing he was rushing to save a dying relative, only to realize you were paying for the cruelest scam of the century? I did, when I found out my tears were priced at $300,000 for a secret luxury wedding. I did not scream. I smiled, drained our joint accounts down to exactly $1, and bought a one-way ticket to Rome. Let their fake pride burn in unpaid bills. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with no budget to keep the lights on or pay our hardworking team. If you enjoy our story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our staff can pay for their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My name is Maeve Singh, and this is my story. The rain in Seattle always had a way of masking the truth, washing away the dirt on the surface only to leave a deep, freezing dampness in your bones. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when I finally unlocked the door to our downtown apartment. I had just finished another grueling 80-hour week as a senior project manager at Novasphere Dynamics, pushing through a massive software launch. Every muscle in my body ached, craving nothing more than the warmth of my bed and the quiet comfort of my husband, Julian. Instead, I stepped into a scene of absolute chaos. The hallway light was blindingly bright, drawers were yanked open, hangers were scattered across the hardwood floor, and Julian was frantically tearing through our walk-in closet, shoving items into his leather weekender bag. His face was pale, his breathing erratic. I dropped my briefcase, the heavy thud echoing in the tense silence. "Julian, what is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling as the exhaustion instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. He stopped, his shoulders heaving, and turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, shimmering with unshed tears. "It is Dominic," he choked out, his voice cracking perfectly. "My brother, there was an accident, a helicopter crash off the coast of Newport, Rhode Island. He was rushed to the hospital. He is in a deep coma. Maeve, they do not think he is going to make it through the night. The family is preparing for the worst." The room seemed to tilt. Dominic, the golden boy of the family, the reckless younger brother who always seemed invincible, was dying. A heavy, suffocating wave of sorrow hit my chest. I rushed forward, wrapping my arms around Julian as he buried his face in my neck, his body shaking with what felt like genuine, agonizing sobs. "I am so sorry," I whispered, holding him tight. "I will get my phone right now. I will book 2 first-class tickets to Rhode Island. We will go together. Your mother Beatrice must be completely out of her mind with grief. She needs us both right now." I pulled away and reached for my phone, my project manager instincts taking over. I needed to solve this. I needed to get my husband to his family. But Julian suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly tight. "No," he said, his voice instantly firming up, the trembling vanishing for a split second before he masked it with a desperate sigh. "No, Maeve, you cannot come. Not yet." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean, I cannot come? You are my husband. Dominic is my family too. I am not letting you face this alone." "The intensive care unit rules are incredibly strict right now," Julian explained, rubbing his temples as if fighting off a massive migraine. "They are only allowing immediate blood relatives on the floor. Just me, my mother, and my father. If you come, you will just be sitting alone in a sterile waiting room. Plus, you know how my mother gets under stress. She is going to be hysterical. Having an in-law there might overwhelm her. Please, Maeve, I need you to stay here." He stepped closer, taking both of my hands in his eyes pleading. "I need you to be my anchor. The medical bills are going to be astronomical. Multiple surgeries, life support, the best neurologists on the East Coast. We are going to need liquid cash, and I need you here to manage the finances. Can you do that for me? Can you hold down the fort?" It made a twisted kind of sense. Julian's family had always been proud, obsessed with appearances, but notoriously terrible with money. For the past 5 years, my salary at Nova Sphere Dynamics had been the invisible pillar holding up Julian's endless string of failed startup investments. If Dominic needed world-class care, my money was the only real lifeline they had. Okay, I agreed, my heart breaking for him. Okay, I will stay. I will handle everything here. Driven by pure, absolute trust, I stayed awake for the rest of the night, while Julian paced the living room, supposedly making hushed, frantic phone calls to surgeons and relatives. I took over the packing. I carefully folded his clothes, packed his toiletries, and made sure he had everything he needed. Then, I sat at my laptop, opened my banking portal, and authorized a direct transfer of $75,000 from my hard-earned personal savings into our joint checking account. It was a massive chunk of my security, but human life was priceless. The money is in the account, I told him as the sun began to peek through the rainy clouds. Use it for whatever Dominic needs. Do not even think about the cost. He pulled me into a deep, desperate kiss, whispering that I was his savior, before rushing out the door to catch his early morning flight. The heavy oak door clicked shut. I stood alone in the quiet, dimly lit apartment. The storm outside had calmed, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. I walked back into the bedroom to clean up the mess he had left behind in his panic. I picked up a discarded tie from the floor. Then I froze. A strange, uncomfortable sensation began to crawl up my spine. My mind, trained to spot inconsistencies in massive data projects, suddenly started replaying the events of the night. I looked at the empty spaces in his closet. I thought about the clothes I had just zipped into his luggage. If my husband was flying across the country to sit in a plastic chair in a freezing hospital waiting room, terrified that his brother was bleeding out on an operating table, why did he not pack a single pair of sweatpants? Why did he not take his comfortable hoodies or his old sneakers? I stood in the center of the room, my breathing growing shallow as the suffocating realization settled over me. I had just packed 3 of his most expensive, custom-tailored Italian wool suits. I had packed silk ties, polished leather Oxfords, and a set of engraved silver cufflinks. You do not wear a tuxedo to a deathbed. There was a sickening perfection to his panic, a rehearsed rhythm to his tears. The apartment suddenly felt incredibly cold, and for the first time in 5 years, I realized I did not know the man who had just walked out my door. 48 hours had passed since my husband walked out the door with his custom suits and my absolute trust. For 2 entire days, my life had been a nightmare of anxious waiting. Julian kept his phone calls brief, his voice always hushed and trembling. Just yesterday at 3 in the afternoon, he called to whisper that the surgeons were preparing to drill into his brother's skull to relieve the swelling. I had cried in the company restroom, terrified for him. But on the second night, the agonizing silence of our apartment was shattered by a sharp, cheerful chime. It echoed from the study. It was Julian's backup tablet, a device he claimed was broken and forgotten in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. I walked over, my pulse quickening with a strange sense of dread. The screen was illuminated in the dark room. A cloud calendar synchronization notification hovered aggressively over the lock screen. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the text. Final tuxedo fitting. Newport Regal Resort, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My blood turned to absolute ice. The Newport Regal Resort was a 5-star luxury estate built for billionaires, not a trauma center with an intensive care unit. The tiny, nagging suspicion I had buried 2 nights ago suddenly exploded into a blaring siren. I grabbed the tablet. He had changed the passcode, of course, but Julian was fundamentally lazy with security. He always used his mother's birth year multiplied by 2. I typed in the 4 digits. The screen instantly unlocked. My fingers flew across the glass surface. He thought hiding his primary mail application deep within a nested folder would keep me out, forgetting completely that he had married a woman who built encrypted databases for a living. I bypassed the superficial locks, pulled up the root directory, and forced the hidden folder to open. It was labeled Project Alpha. a waterfall of digital receipts, PDF contracts, and vendor agreements flooded the screen. I clicked the first attachment. It was a contract for a 90-foot luxury yacht rental scheduled for the rehearsal dinner, carrying a price tag of $22,000. The next document was a binding retainer for a 12-piece authentic New Orleans jazz band. Then came the catering and floral invoices. $50,000 for thousands of white roses flown in fresh from Ecuador. $35,000 for a celebrity lighting director to illuminate the ballroom. Endless orders of beluga caviar, imported Wagyu beef, and towering pyramids of vintage champagne. I scoured the folder, my breathing turning into sharp, shallow gasps. There was not a single medical bill. There was no hospital admission form. There was no tragic helicopter crash off the coast. My hands shook so violently I had to place the tablet flat on the desk. I dug deeper into the operating system, uncovering a muted messaging application. There was an active thread with 4 participants, buzzing with unread notifications. The name of the group chat stared back at me, violently mocking my grief. Dominic's wedding of the century. I scrolled to the top of the day's messages. There was Dominic, the man who was supposedly fighting for his very life on a ventilator, was smiling brightly in a high-resolution photograph, holding up a crystal glass of whiskey on a sunlit terrace. Beside him stood a stunning blonde woman in a silk designer gown. I recognized her instantly from the financial news networks. She was the youngest daughter of the most ruthless, powerful real estate billionaire on the eastern seaboard. The disgusting truth snapped together with blinding clarity. They were marrying into astronomical wealth. Julian's family, practically drowning in secret debt and desperate to climb the social ladder, was orchestrating the most elaborate illusion of a lifetime. They needed to present themselves as old-money aristocratic elites to match the billionaire bride's family. And I did not fit their perfect aesthetic. I was a self-made woman, a tech worker, someone who earned her wealth through grueling 80-hour weeks rather than inheriting a trust fund. They had fabricated a horrific tragedy just to keep me 3,000 miles away. My eyes locked onto a specific message sent by Beatrice, my mother-in-law. Her words dripped with aristocratic poison. "Just leave that ATM from the Wild West at home," she wrote. "I have already told the in-laws that Julian is currently single, highly successful, and acting as the lead investor for our family's upcoming real estate ventures. We cannot have her showing up and ruining the aesthetic with her corporate suits." Beneath her message, Julian had replied, "Do not worry, Mother. She bought the crash story completely. She even wired over $75,000 for medical emergencies, which perfectly covered the down payment for the string quartet and the private security detail." The breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. The automated teller machine, that was all I was to them. I immediately opened a secure browser tab and logged directly into my private wealth management portal. I checked the master ledger for my personal investment fund, the account holding the equity and bonuses I had bled for over 5 years at Novosphere Dynamics. The $75,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 3 months, while Julian claimed to be attending startup seminars, he had secretly linked his digital wallet to my secondary accounts. Over $250,000 had already been siphoned off, every single day. Thousands of dollars were bleeding out to cover the exorbitant deposits for this fraudulent aristocratic fantasy. My husband was standing on a coastal estate in a bespoke tuxedo, playing the role of an unmarried billionaire, using my life savings to buy his family a seat at a table they did not deserve. I kept scrolling through the endless stream of vendor emails, driven by a morbid, unstoppable need to see exactly how deep this rot went. Buried beneath a chain of floral delivery confirmations, I found an automated message sent from the private security firm contracted by the resort. It contained a direct, unencrypted web portal link intended for the master wedding planner, designed to offer live visual access to the VIP preparation suites and the main ballroom to coordinate the event flow seamlessly. My fingers hovered over the glowing screen for a fraction of a second before I tapped the blue text. A black loading grid appeared, slowly buffering until 12 separate high-definition video feeds illuminated my dark, silent study. The visual assault of the Newport Regal Resort was completely overwhelming. The afternoon sun was shining brilliantly over perfectly manicured lawns and shimmering fountains, a sharp, cruel contrast to the endless, dreary rain pelting against my window in Seattle. I maximized the camera feed labeled as the VIP lounge, and there he was. My husband, the man I had held tightly against my chest just 48 hours ago as he supposedly wept over his dying brother. Julian was standing near a massive marble fireplace, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He was wearing the exact same charcoal gray custom suit I had carefully folded and packed into his leather bag while he pretended to panic. But there was absolutely no grief on his face. He was radiating a sickening, magnetic confidence. A stunning bridesmaid in a fitted emerald silk gown was leaning close to him, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. Julian threw his head back, laughing effortlessly at something she said, before leaning in to whisper intimately in her ear. He was playing his role perfectly, the dashing, unattached, obscenely wealthy venture capitalist. He was flirting, vibrating with the thrill of his fabricated bachelorhood. I watched him clink his glass against hers, smiling brilliantly, drinking a toast to a life built entirely on my stolen labor and my blind trust. I switched the view to the adjacent camera feed, capturing the sprawling outdoor terrace overlooking the ocean. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, was holding court among a group of older, impeccably dressed women. She was draped in a heavy silver gown that caught the sunlight with every movement, the bodice heavily encrusted with what looked like thousands of diamonds. I recognized the exclusive designer brand immediately. That single dress cost more than what most hardworking people earned in 3 solid years. She was gesturing expansively with a perfectly manicured hand, dramatically pointing toward the private beach, even without audio. I could read her arrogant posture and the exaggerated movements of her mouth. She was boasting. She was telling these old-money aristocratic matriarchs about her family's vast, fictional real estate empire, cementing her status as royalty among the elite. She was wearing my late nights, my missed lunches, and my stress-induced migraines as a glittering costume to impress absolute strangers. This was the exact moment where a normal wife would break down completely. This was the moment where I should have collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor, screaming into my hands, tearing at my hair, completely consumed by the agonizing heartbreak of a shattered marriage. But I did not shed a single tear. The sheer, colossal magnitude of the betrayal short-circuited my nervous system. The sorrow simply vanished, freezing over in an instant. A profound, absolute stillness washed over me. It was not numbness. It was a terrifying awakening. The heavy, blinding fog of love and wifely duty evaporated from my mind, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp fury that felt remarkably like pure clarity. I stood up from the mahogany desk and walked slowly through our apartment, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I passed the living room, stopping in front of a large, silver-framed photograph from our wedding day resting on the console table. I looked at the young, naive woman in the white dress, staring adoringly at the handsome man beside her. 5 years. I had given him 5 of the best years of my life. I thought about the vacations we never took because Julian needed seed money for his next big idea. I thought about the anniversary dinners I canceled because I had to work overtime to cover the mortgage he could not help pay. I realized with a sickening, heavy thud in my chest that I had never truly been a wife. I was a host. I was a blind, stupid financial sponsor for a family of ruthless parasites. They had attached themselves to my ambition, draining my resources to fund their pathetic, hollow delusions of grandeur. I reached out and gently placed the wedding photograph face down on the polished wood. The sudden urge to pick up my phone, call Julian, and scream every vile curse word I knew into the receiver briefly flashed across my mind. I could ruin his flirting right now. I could demand my money back. But screaming is what victims do. Screaming gives the abuser a chance to explain, to manipulate, to play the victim, and to gaslight you into doubting your own sanity. It gives them the satisfaction of knowing they broke you. No, I would not give them the honor of my outrage. I knew exactly how these people operated. They did not care about love, or loyalty, or family bonds. They worshipped blindly at only two altars: cold hard cash and social prestige. If I confronted them now, in private, they would simply spin a new web of lies to cover their tracks and quietly find another way to survive. To truly punish them, a simple divorce was not enough. I had to take away the very things they valued most in this world. I had to let them climb to the absolute highest peak of their glittering, fraudulent mountain. I had to let them taste the ultimate victory, surrounded by the billionaires they so desperately wanted to impress. And then, at the exact moment of their greatest, most public triumph, I would shatter the financial foundation beneath their feet and watch them plummet into the abyss. I sat back down at the mahogany desk, my fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. The time for sorrow was over. Now, it was time for execution. Working at Novasphere Dynamics had given me a masterful understanding of cybersecurity and financial routing. I opened a highly encrypted terminal on my laptop and bypassed the standard user interfaces of our banking institutions, logging directly into the administrative backends of my primary wealth management portals. For the past 5 years, Julian had slowly woven himself into my financial infrastructure. He was an authorized user on 3 premium credit cards, a joint owner of our primary checking account, and a beneficiary on my high-yield investment portfolios. He felt safe because he believed I was too busy, or perhaps too naive, to untangle the web. He was completely wrong. I initiated a mass withdrawal protocol. First, I liquidated the mutual funds and the short-term bonds, completely disregarding the minor early withdrawal penalties. Next, I targeted the primary joint checking and savings accounts. The screen displayed a staggering total of $2,450,000. That was the sum of my 80-hour work weeks, my endless stress, and the future I had blindly sacrificed for a family of ruthless parasites. With a sequence of sharp, rhythmic keystrokes, I routed the entire balance through a series of anonymous shell accounts, bouncing the funds across 3 different time zones before safely depositing them into a heavily encrypted private bank in Geneva, Switzerland. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. The massive balance on my screen rapidly drained, dropping from millions down to zero. But I did not leave it at zero. With deliberate precision, I wired exactly $1 back into the joint checking account, a single, solitary dollar. It was the exact monetary value of my remaining respect for my husband. Closing the terminal, I stood up and walked into the bedroom. I did not bother with large suitcases. I grabbed a small, durable leather carry-on bag and packed only what truly belonged to me: my passport, my birth certificate, the vintage watch my father had given me, and a few comfortable changes of clothes. I left behind the expensive designer dresses Julian had insisted I buy to impress his business partners. I left behind the matching luggage sets. I left behind every physical reminder of the fake life we had built. Before leaving the apartment, I walked over to the kitchen island. I connected my laptop to the wireless printer and printed a high-resolution, full-page screenshot of the secret group chat. The ink was dark and crisp, clearly displaying Beatrice calling me a Wild West automated teller machine, right alongside Julian boasting about using my money for his string quartet. I placed the paper squarely in the center of the marble dining table. Then, I slowly slid the diamond wedding ring off my left hand. The metal felt heavy and suddenly foreign. I took a sharp metal pushpin from the drawer and drove it brutally through the center of the ring, piercing straight through the printed text of Julian's message, embedding the pin deep into the expensive wood of the table. It was a flawless, silent resignation letter. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline application. For years, I had begged Julian to take a vacation to Rome, Italy. I wanted to walk through the ancient ruins, drink wine on cobblestone streets, and breathe in the history. He had always dismissed the idea immediately, calling it a completely useless expense, insisting that we needed to invest that capital into his next doomed startup. Tonight, the capital was mine. I booked a one-way, the first-class ticket on the next available international flight departing from Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The cost was $8,500. I paid for it using the freshly secured funds from my Swiss account, not feeling a single ounce of guilt. 2 hours later, I was seated in the luxurious, oversized leather seat of the business class cabin. The ambient lighting was dim, and the soft hum of the jet engines provided a soothing background noise. The flight attendant handed me a crystal glass of aged red wine. I took a slow sip, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue. As the captain announced clearance for takeoff, I opened my laptop on the tray table one final time. Julian still had the physical credit cards in his wallet in Newport, and his digital wallet was actively linked to my accounts. I had written a custom script while waiting at the terminal gate. I took a deep breath, smiled, and pressed the execute key. In an instant, the script initiated a complete financial blackout. It wiped his Apple Pay and Google Pay tokens, permanently froze all physical credit lines, and instantly canceled the remaining limits on every single card carrying my name. Simultaneously, the program accessed my cellular provider and permanently blocked every phone number, email address, and social media account associated with Julian, Beatrice, Dominic, and the rest of their family. The heavy aircraft accelerated down the runway, pushing me back into my seat. As the wheels lifted off the damp Seattle tarmac, I looked out the window at the sprawling grid of city lights shrinking below me. The suffocating weight I had carried for 5 long years completely vanished, left behind in the rain. I raised my glass to the dark, endless sky, officially bearing the title of Julian's wife forever, and finally breathing in the absolute, intoxicating freedom of being Maeve Singh again. 3,000 miles away, on the manicured coastline of the Atlantic Ocean, the grand illusion was reaching its glittering, spectacular zenith. The main ballroom of the Newport Regal Resort had been transformed into an absolute wonderland of excessive wealth. Thousands of imported white roses cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their sweet, heavy fragrance mingling with the salty ocean breeze. Beneath the blinding brilliance of 6 massive crystal chandeliers, the 12-piece New Orleans jazz band played a lively, intoxicating rhythm. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and vintage champagne. Dominic and his new billionaire bride were holding each other on the center of the polished mahogany dance floor, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb sitting in his brother's wallet. Standing near the edge of the dance floor, Julian was deeply engaged in conversation with the bride's father, the legendary real estate tycoon. Julian was holding a glass of scotch, his posture relaxed, exuding the practiced arrogance of a man who belonged in this exclusive world of private jets and offshore accounts. He was effortlessly spinning a web of corporate jargon, blatantly plagiarizing the massive software launch I had just completed at Novasphere Dynamics, presenting the intricate coding architecture as his own visionary venture capital investment. The billionaire father-in-law nodded approvingly, thoroughly impressed by the brilliant, wealthy young man his daughter's new family had produced. A few feet away, Beatrice was practically vibrating with absolute ecstasy. She was holding court among the wives of senators and hedge fund managers, her diamond-encrusted silver gown shimmering with every breathless laugh. She was sipping her champagne, looking around the opulent ballroom with a gaze of complete and utter possession. In her mind, the deception was already over. The wedding bands had been exchanged. The ink on the marriage certificate was dry. She truly believed her family had permanently cemented their status among the American aristocratic elite. The grift had worked perfectly. But high society runs on a very strict, unforgiving clock, and the schedule for the evening demanded a grand finale. The head event manager of the resort, a tall, imposing man in a flawless dark suit, discreetly cut through the crowd of dancing billionaires. His face was a mask of extreme professionalism, but his eyes carried the firm, unyielding calculation of a man who handled millions of dollars daily. He approached Julian, waiting for a brief lull in the conversation before stepping forward. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his voice low but perfectly audible over the brass instruments. "I apologize for the interruption, but we are 30 minutes away from the midnight fireworks display over the bay, As per the final vendor contract, I need to process the remaining balance for the catering, the ballroom rental, and the pyrotechnics before we can initiate the launch sequence. The billionaire father-in-law raised an eyebrow. Looking at Julian did not even flinch. He offered a smooth, dismissive chuckle, waving his hand as if the request was nothing more than a minor annoyance. Of course, Julian replied smoothly, turning his charming smile toward the manager. Let us take care of that right now. What is the final damage for the evening? The remaining balance is exactly $300,000, sir, the manager stated clearly, holding out a sleek, wireless POS. Excellent, Julian said, his voice dripping with condescending confidence. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom Italian suit and pulled out the heavy metal black card, the card that had my name strictly attached to the primary account, the card I had digitally neutralized while flying over the Midwest. He handed it to the manager with a theatrical flourish, fully aware that the eyes of the bride's father and several surrounding corporate executives were watching him. The manager took the card and slid the heavy metal chip into the bottom of the terminal. The machine displayed a small processing circle. Julian took another confident sip of his scotch, preparing to return to his conversation about artificial intelligence investments. Then it happened. A sharp, dry electronic beep cut through the immediate area. It was not the pleasant, melodic chime of an approved transaction. It was the harsh, jarring noise of a systemic rejection. The screen on the terminal flashed a bright, glaring red. The manager looked down at the screen, his professional demeanor faltering for a fraction of a second. I am sorry, sir. The card has been declined. Julian's confident smile instantly froze. A few heads turned toward them. The father-in-law stopped swirling his drink. Declined. Julian scoffed, a nervous, tight laugh escaping his throat. That is absolutely impossible. It is a premium corporate card without a preset spending limit. The fraud prevention system must have flagged the large amount. Just run it again. Force the authorization through. The manager kept his face perfectly blank. He pulled the card out and firmly inserted it into the machine a second time. The processing circle spun for 2 agonizing seconds. Beep! Declined again, the manager said, his voice dropping an octave, losing a fraction of its polite warmth. The terminal is stating that the account has been permanently closed by the primary account holder. I am going to need another form of payment for the $300,000 immediately. The lively jazz music suddenly felt miles away. The casual chatter of the ultra-rich guests in their immediate vicinity completely died down. Beatrice, noticing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, stopped laughing and turned to stare in horror. Julian stood absolutely paralyzed under the blazing crystal chandeliers, the color rapidly draining from his face as the crushing, humiliating weight of reality finally crashed down upon him. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. Julian's hands began to shake violently. He dropped the black metal card onto the silver tray and frantically dug into the pockets of his custom Italian suit for his smartphone. With trembling fingers, he opened our joint banking application. The loading icon spun for what felt like an eternity before the dashboard finally refreshed. His eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. Staring back at him, in bold digital numbers, was the total available balance: $1. Directly beneath that solitary dollar was a transaction note I had attached to the massive outbound wire transfer. He read it aloud, his voice barely a choked whisper. Medical bills for the coma patient. Have a good evening. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost under the crystal chandeliers. He looked up, locking eyes with the event manager. There has been a terrible mistake, Julian stammered, sweat rapidly beading on his forehead. My wife, she must have initiated a security freeze on our accounts. Let me just call her to clear this up. He dialed my number, only to be met with the cold, automated voice stating the number was permanently disconnected. The event manager had seen enough. He raised his hand and gave a sharp, definitive signal to his staff. Instantly, the 12-piece jazz band stopped playing mid-note. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom were pulled shut with a resounding thud, and 6 large security guards in dark suits stepped firmly in front of the exits. "I am sorry, ladies and gentlemen," the manager's voice echoed loudly across the suddenly silent room. "The midnight fireworks display has been officially canceled. The host of this evening is unable to settle a finalized debt of $300,000. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd of billionaires, hedge fund managers, and socialites. The whispers quickly erupted into a chaotic symphony of vicious gossip. The bride's father, the ruthless real estate tycoon, stepped forward, his face flushed with pure fury. He snatched Julian aggressively by his lapels. "What the hell is going on here?" the billionaire demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Are you telling me you do not have the money, you sat in my house, drank my 50-year-old scotch, and told me you managed a billion-dollar venture capital fund?" Julian tried to desperately spin a new lie, stammering something pathetic about tied-up assets and international corporate acquisitions. But the tycoon was not a man anyone could con twice. He pulled out his own phone, dialed his private wealth manager, and put him on speakerphone. Within 2 minutes, the brutal truth was broadcasted to the entire room. Julian had absolutely zero assets under his name. He owned no venture capital firm. He was unemployed, deeply in debt, and his entire glittering lifestyle was funded entirely by a software project manager in Seattle, whom he had just betrayed. The billionaire bride shrieked in absolute disgust, ripping the expensive silk veil from her hair and throwing it directly into Dominic's stunned face. "It is completely over," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Get these pathetic, gold-digging frauds out of my sight." It was an absolute massacre. The billionaire's private security team physically grabbed Julian, Dominic, and Beatrice by their arms, dragging them forcefully through the opulent lobby of the Newport Regal Resort. Beatrice was hysterically sobbing, her heavy diamond-encrusted silver gown snagging on a decorative marble pillar and tearing open as she was violently tossed out the front doors. She lost her designer heels in the struggle. The 3 of them were thrown onto the cold, damp gravel driveway, humiliated and utterly ruined in front of the most powerful people on the eastern seaboard. Julian desperately scrambled to book a flight back to Seattle, maxing out a predatory payday loan with a devastating interest rate just to afford a middle seat in economy class on a red-eye flight. He sprinted through the pouring rain back to our downtown apartment, his custom suit soaked and ruined, praying he could somehow manipulate me into taking him back. He threw open the door, shouting my name into the darkness, but the apartment was hollow. Half the closet was completely empty. He stumbled into the dining room and saw the final nail in his coffin resting on the marble table, the printed screenshot of his own cruel words, pinned violently to the wood by my diamond wedding ring. In that agonizingly silent room, he collapsed to his knees, weeping loudly, finally realizing he had just permanently destroyed the only woman who had ever truly loved him, the very woman who had kept a roof over his head. 2 years have passed since that spectacular night. The fallout was apocalyptic for them. The billionaire father-in-law made sure Julian was permanently blacklisted from every single corporate sector in the country. Julian filed for complete bankruptcy 6 months later. Today, the man who once played a fake billionaire in tailored suits wears a cheap, neon yellow vest. He works the graveyard shift as a toll booth operator on a desolate, freezing highway in a remote, forgotten town, handing out quarters and breathing in exhaust fumes, living every single second of his pathetic life in inescapable regret. As for me, I am sitting at a small, sunlit cafe overlooking the magnificent Colosseum in Rome. The morning air is crisp, carrying the sweet scent of fresh pastries and ancient history. I am wearing a stunning, tailored white linen dress, completely free from the heavy chains of my past. I am profoundly wealthy and wildly successful, now running my own highly sought-after independent tech consultancy firm across Europe. I take a slow, satisfying sip of my perfect espresso, smiling brightly at the golden sunrise. They say success is the best revenge. But the truth is, the most ruthless. devastating revenge of all, is simply living a breathtakingly radiant life that the people who betrayed you will never, ever have the privilege to touch. Thank you so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and empowering, please consider helping us with just $1 by scanning the donation QR code on your screen or by using the donation link located in the description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and empowering them to continue creating more amazing stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and have a truly wonderful day.